Well, it's now just past 1300 GMT and we start in the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, where NATO leaders are now wrapping up their annual summit. The war in Ukraine has dominated the talks, with President Volodymyr Zelenskyy making an appearance there on the last day. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg met the Ukrainian leader and said that Kyiv is now closer to NATO than ever before. But he warned, despite talks on Ukraine's future membership of the military alliance, the most urgent task was the country's fight against Russian forces.
We have agreed a three-part package bringing Ukraine closer to NATO. A multi-year program of practical assistance, establishing a new NATO-Ukraine Council, and reaffirming that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and removing the requirement for the membership action plan. Our new multi-year program of assistance for Ukraine will help you transition from Soviet era to NATO equipment and standards, and will make Ukraine's forces fully interoperable with NATO.
Now, despite frustrations around Kyiv's membership talks, Volodymyr Zelenskyy has thanked NATO for all its help.
We have come a long way in cooperation with NATO, and our soldiers have the most fresh experience of cooperation with various members of the alliance. The skillful use of NATO weapons by our soldiers has already proven that global democracy is stronger than any terrorist threats against us.
Our diplomatic editor, James Bayes, joins us now from the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius. James, the alliance there seeming to find some unity after grappling with some pretty tricky language, it seems.
Tricky language and grappling also with President Zelenskyy, as he always does, fighting very, very hard to get everything he can for his country, everything he can in terms of arms, ammunition, but also politically trying to get a seat at the NATO table as soon as possible. 24 hours ago, he was saying it's absurd that they didn't come up with a timeline for membership. Now he's being much more diplomatic. Now he's with the NATO allies and talking to them face to face and knows really that there's nothing else he's going to get at this summit. But he's still making it clear that he didn't get what he wanted in terms of the language on membership. A point I put to one of those from one of the NATO countries. This is Wopke Hoekstra. He is the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of the Netherlands.
This truly is a historic summit, and of course it is about 2%, it is about Sweden, but it is also about our tremendous commitment to Ukraine, which I do think is being put on the table here today, and also we will continue to articulate that in the months and years going forward.
He made the point that in your other capacity as an EU foreign minister, the EU has helped Ukraine by giving it candidacy status. He said that would be the same if a membership was offered. It would be a boost to the people of Ukraine and it would be a signal to Russia. Why not issue an invitation? He said that doesn't make you a member of NATO.
Well, you know, I think none of us can truly imagine what it is like to send your own sons and daughters to the frontier, to the front line, and knowing that many of them won't make it back. So that in such a case, you're always looking for more. You know, I can actually understand and appreciate, and yet at the same time, you know, our commitment is crystal clear. It is there for the long run, and we are articulating that once again today, and we're doing that through our commitments in continuing to deliver weapons, in also upgrading the way in which we have our conversations about the future. And my sense is we're on the verge of also committing to longer-term security commitments here today.
President Zelenskyy said membership, which you've said depends on the conditions. He said those conditions, in his view, are when it's secure on our land. Is that your understanding of what the conditions are?
Well, you know, in my mind, it is always a combination of three things. One is make sure that Ukraine is successful on the battlefield, because if they don't, any other conversation about this topic actually is useless. The second one is about security guarantees, and the third one is about NATO. In time, we will arrive at all three. But if we do not manage to sustain our effort today, tomorrow, and in the many long weeks and months to come, all else is actually futile.
It's not too many long months to come until November 2024. I know it's a US domestic election, but a different US leadership, Donald Trump or another Republican who is not so keen on the war in Ukraine, could that be a real problem for this alliance and for this support of Ukraine? And could you face an Afghanistan-type situation?
I'm much more optimistic because, in my view, both Democrats and Republicans have articulated their exceptionally strong commitment to NATO, also in the past number of years. And I do believe that this will continue to be, NATO will continue to be the cornerstone of our security. And that is true both for our friends in North America as it is true for everyone in Europe. So I am much more optimistic, and I think we need to be realistic about how much longer the war might be going on. That might well take us into another couple of years.
The Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of the Netherlands speaking to me a little earlier in an acting capacity because, of course, last week the Dutch government collapsed. What's going on here now is the summit is winding up, and what always happens on this last moment of the summit, the last hour or so, is there's a series of news conferences taking place because there are the 31 NATO allies, there's Sweden also, an invitee nation that the rest of NATO hopes will be a member very, very soon, and there's Ukraine. So 33 different press conferences and statements to reporters, but we think we know the news of the day, and that is very much that Ukraine came here asking for a lot. It didn't get everything it wanted. What it didn't get was the commitments on membership that President Zelenskyy wanted.
And we'll be bringing you some of those press conferences, a selection of them, here live on Al Jazeera. For now, thank you very much. Our diplomatic editor, James Bay, is there for us in Vilnius. Well, meanwhile, G7 nations are expected to announce a plan that could give Ukraine long-term security assurances. Russia says it's potentially very dangerous for the West to provide Ukraine security guarantees.
We consider this a mistake and potentially very dangerous because providing any security guarantees to Ukraine effectively ignores the international principle of indivisible security. That said, providing security guarantees to Ukraine encroaches the Russian Federation's security. This is impossible. This is fraught with very short, medium and long-term negative consequences.
Well, let's get more of the view now from the Russian capital with Yulia Shapovalova. Yulia, short, medium and long-term negative consequences? That sounds both ominous and vague. What does that potentially mean in practice?
Well, you know, it's been officially said many, many times here that NATO is at war with Russia. The Russian authorities say it's a proxy war fought by the Ukrainian proxy army under the full NATO control, fulfilling their goals. That NATO is not a defensive but an aggressive alliance. It's explained by the fact that the NATO countries have never waged wars on their territory, but only on the territory of other countries. The possibility of Ukraine's accession to NATO was one of Russia's red lines, one of the pretexts for the unleashed back in February 2022 Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. And NATO's general stance, as it's seen here now, is that none of the NATO countries are willing to participate in a direct clash with Russia and risk their army. And that's positive news for Russia. Of course, Russia is not happy about Turkey's decision to give the green light to Sweden to join NATO. Russia promised to take retaliatory measures, but it remains to be seen which ones. Russia says Ukraine's membership in the alliance comes with obligations. Will Ukraine be willing to participate in potential conflicts that NATO may get involved in the future? Russia thinks it's not the case. On the one hand, partly Ukraine is in NATO. They receive weapons, intelligence, military training. On the other hand, as Ukraine was not accepted in the past, for many reasons actually, not only because it had disputed territories, it was very corrupt, but also because NATO knew about Russia's territorial claims. They knew that the Russian-Ukrainian armed conflict was inevitable. And of course, it didn't want to get involved in a direct armed confrontation with Russia under the collective defense principle. Many of those reasons still remain. Plus, Ukraine's membership is still unreal for now because it will mean not only a change in the geopolitical balance, but also Ukraine's entry into the Western world, which means that Ukraine will be able to determine some of NATO's agenda, something not so many NATO countries are ready for. Therefore, Russia is not very much much concerned about Ukraine's membership this time around. There will be a bigger problem if Ukraine stops knocking on NATO's closed doors all the time and begin creating new promising military alliances between Ukraine and a number of certain countries which will be willing and interested in the military cooperation, or maybe signing direct bilateral treaties on collective defense.
Yulia, just separately, a Russian general who was at one point leading operations in Ukraine, Sergei Surovikin, he hasn't been seen in some time. I know he's always had a close relationship with the Wagner chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Do we know where Surovikin is or how he is?
Yeah, it's an interesting story, actually. General Sergei Surovikin, commander of the airspace forces and deputy head of the general staff of the Russian army, has not appeared in public for 2 weeks now since the Wagner Group, so-called Wagner Group armed rebellion, and nothing is known about his whereabouts now. On July the 29th, Russian and Western media, citing their sources, reported that the general could be detained or even arrested. And on the same day, pro-Kremlin Baza channel published a comment by Surovikin's daughter, who actually said that nothing happened to her father. And the general's family right now denies rumors of his detention or arrest. But Surovikin's appeal to the Wagner fighters, which he recorded at the very beginning of the Prigozhin rebellion, still remains his last appearance in the information field. According to chairman of the State Duma Defense Committee, Andrei Katsapolov, Surovikin is now having some rest and is not yet available. Well, some Telegram channels also say that he can be in North Caucasus, but actually none of those reports have been officially confirmed. And of course, we're waiting for more information to come.
Indeed, plenty of intrigue in the meantime. Yulia Shapovalova speaking to us there from Moscow. Thank you, Yulia.